The first thing I want to point out is that the Supreme Court misstated the nature of the legal burden that a petitioner who goes to court to challenge a presidential election bears. It also confused, the second point, it also confused the standard to which a petitioner must prove his or her case. Then, number three, the Supreme Court failed to see that illegality is an independent ground for invalidating an election. And then the fourth point, the court confused the difference between the effect of illegalities and the effect of irregularities, because they don't have the same effect. An election can be conducted substantially in accordance with the law, but it has got irregularities that affect the result, which is quite different from an election conducted in an illegal manner. Yeah? So I'll be talking about this at some length because it is important. The other problem is that the Supreme Court took judicial notice that technology fails. This is an important point because what it means is the Supreme Court did not require proof that the technology had failed. I just said, as a matter of judicial notice, this technology usually does fail. Now, that has knock-on effects because this year, technology is again at issue. So if the court does what it did in 2013, then it will take judicial notice again that technology fails. What this does, as I'll be saying in a short while, is that it creates moral hazard. And I'll be explaining the nature of that moral hazard, because I think we have experienced it. And then lack of integrity, the final point, lack of integrity of foundational documents, and especially the register in 2013 and Form 34As in 2017. And those problems were there. They were overlooked or they were not dealt with in a convincing way by the court. And those problems are going to be a fairly serious barrier to anyone who is filing a petition in the Supreme Court, and I'll explain that in a minute. Now, what do I mean by each of these points that I have made, that the court misstated the nature of the legal burden that the petitioner bears? Now, the court argued that if you go to court to challenge an election, the election of a candidate, you must prove, first, illegality, but you must also show that the illegality affected the result. Okay? What that means is, affect the result in law is a technical term. It means that somebody else other than the person declared winner would have won that election. That's what it means when it says affect the result. So in other words, if you can demonstrate that the illegalities occurred, but you're not able to demonstrate that somebody else would have won the election other than the person who was declared winner, your case is thrown out. That is the effect of it. Now, so that's the first thing that the court created. I'll show you why that's a problem in a minute. The second issue was confusion about the standards to which a petitioner must prove his case. In civil cases, we say you're supposed to prove your case on a balance of probabilities. In other words, all things considered, it's more likely that this happened, that what you are alleging happened than it not. Now, in criminal cases, we prove beyond reasonable doubt. Not beyond all doubt, but beyond reasonable doubt. Now, in the body of the judgment, the court seemed to be saying that in this particular petition, the standard should be somewhere in between balance of probability and proof beyond reasonable doubt. But they threw in, the judges threw in a comment in making this statement where they said that in a data-specific election, I don't know what that means because I don't know what election is not about data. But I said in a data-specific election, presumably they meant 50% plus one, you may have to prove beyond reasonable doubt. So we are in this situation now where it's not clear what the standard to which you must prove illegality is. Okay. Now, the third point I made was that failure to appreciate that illegality is an independent ground for invalidating an election. I'll be coming back to that in a fair amount of detail because I think it is important and I think it's going to be very crucial in the petition that is before the Supreme Court. All right. Now, let me go to the new problems that I think that I think arise naturally, not directly, but they arise naturally from the 2013 petition. The biggest problem is moral hazard. And the question I asked, and I asked this same question in Uganda because I think, and I'll be explaining to you why, is what incentive does an election management body have to conduct an honest election if the court won't hold it to standards? Because that's exactly the problem we have had. If you look at the problems that IEBC experienced with all the procurement around the 2017 election, they were a mirror image of the problems of 2013. So the question is it an accident? I don't think it is. I think having been held to such a lenient standard in 2013, IEBC has not had an incentive to run an open, transparent election. Now, the second problem, a new problem, is that the Ugandan Supreme Court has borrowed the Raila Odinga petition and has used it in the case of Amama Bambazi last year. It used it last year. I am a little worried that we might borrow now that Amama Bambazi decision as a precedent in her own petition. Because this is what happens in East Africa. We've got this thing of exporting our legal mistakes to others and then importing them. So there is a risk of recycling. Now, the truth of the matter is that if the petitioners do not persuade the court to depart from the 2013 decision, they cannot possibly win. They would have to persuade the court to depart from all those key points I have made. Standard of proof, burden of proof, effect of illegality. If they don't persuade the court to depart from its findings on that, on each of those issues, it is unlikely that they can win. Now, unfortunately, this is the other new problem. The regional trends on presidential petitions are not very encouraging. Yeah? Courts have proved very lenient towards electoral management bodies, whether you're thinking about Zambia, whether you're thinking about Ghana, whether you're thinking about Uganda. Courts have generally been very lenient towards electoral management bodies. So I'm not very encouraged by that. Then number two, also another regional trend, electoral failure has changed. The nature of electoral failure has changed. It used to be that when you wanted to steal an election, you stuffed the ballot boxes. These days it doesn't happen that way. These days what happens is that there are small failures across the entire electoral cycle. Each of those failures, not enough to invalidate an election, but cumulatively, all of them have a very huge impact on the result. So, so it's become much harder for courts to invalidate elections because the failures are systemic and small. But seen in totality, they're actually fairly serious failures when you see them in total. So that again is going to be, you will probably see, as the evidence is laid out in court, you'll probably see a lot of failures in different aspects of the election. And taken globally, you can obviously see where the result will be going, but taken individually, those failures look very small. Now, let me track back. Let me track back to this point I said about irregularity and illegality, because I think it's crucial to understand it. Because what happened in 2013, the court conflated both irregularity and illegality, conflated illegality with irregularity, and treated them as if they are one ground. Yeah? I want to persuade you that the irregularity and illegality are two different grounds on which a court potentially could invalidate an election. Now, an error or irregularity can affect a result. Okay, and I'll give you an example of this. Now, substantial illegalities can be reasonably deduced to have affected the result, but cannot be demonstrated to have affected the result. I want to persuade you to see the difference between an irregularity that can be demonstrated to have affected the result and an illegality that cannot mathematically or arithmetically be demonstrated to have affected the result, but can be deduced to have affected the result. And I'll try to walk you through this, because these are two independent grounds. If you look at English law, the Representation of the People Act, it's got both the two principal grounds of challenging an election is an error or irregularity, or an illegality, substantial illegality. Now, let me try and describe situation one, which is the situation that relates to irregularity and illegality, irregularity and error. Supposing an election officer commits an error, okay, and during maybe tallying or whatever, commits an error to do with something to do with the ballot boxes, ballot papers. What the court would normally do under those circumstances is to ask the ballot papers be scrutinized. Part of what was happening in 2013, to scrutinize the ballot papers to show who had a majority of the votes. The election itself may be conducted substantially in accordance with the law, but errors and irregularities have resulted in a way that have maybe undercounting, overcounting, and then the scrutiny is ordered and a court establishes that the result is different, the result has been affected. Okay? This rule, the rule about error and irregularity, focuses on the substantiality of the impact, not the substantiality of the error. Okay? It's a substantiality of the impact of the error made by this person. It's the substantiality of the impact, not of the error itself. So the error is not large, but its impact statistically is important. So that is situation one, irregularity or error that affects the result. Quite independent from illegality, which is what I'm going to now. Now, you can have widespread illegalities in an election. For example, corruption, people are bribed, and it can affect, or it can affect an election, but you'll be unable to demonstrate statistically, arithmetically, that the corruption actually affected the result. So that in the UK, an election would be invalid if you're able to demonstrate widespread illegalities, because the court will deduce that these illegalities may be reasonably supposed to have affected the result, even if you could not arithmetically show, that the election has been affected. Even if you could not arithmetically show, it is the substantiality of the illegality, not the substantiality of its impact, demonstrable impact. Yeah. Now, this is a very important point because in 2013, the court argued you must not just demonstrate illegality, but you must demonstrate that the illegality affects the result. Now, a lot of illegalities you can't actually demonstrate that they affect the result. If the law related to transmission of results is not obeyed, for instance, and a series of other illegalities are committed, you may not actually be able to demonstrate mathematically that if the law had been complied with, you'd have won the election. So that what the court did in 2013, it took the law related to irregularities, where the result is affected and demonstrating affecting of the result is important, and read it into the laws and principles related to illegality, where demonstrating arithmetically that the result has been affected is difficult. Okay? Now, if they don't depart from these rules, these two confusion, I don't see how any petitioner can win in the Supreme Court. Okay? Is this clear? Or am I just succeeding in creating a bit of confusion? Yes? Now let's repeat, let's crystallize this. Errors and irregularities whose impact is measurable. Okay? Tallying errors, for example, in which constituency data and announced final results don't match. All you do is scrutinize, and then you can find out who won the election. Substantial illegalities whose impact is not measurable. Okay? And let me give you an example of what substantial illegality might be that results cannot be demonstrated. Okay. Supposing people are intimidated, like what happened in Uganda, some people are intimidated, so you don't turn up to vote. You can't count votes that were never cast. So illegalities were committed, which can be reasonably deduced to have affected the election, but you couldn't demonstrate it because you can't count votes that were not cast. Okay? And you see, the problem with illegality is, it is possible for an administration, like the Museveni administration did in Uganda, to interfere very dramatically with the way the votes are cast, and in a way that denudes the competitor of any votes. And yet, if you say in court that the competitor must prove illegality and must also prove that the illegality affected the result, you would never be able to do it. Okay? Or, for example, supposing the Electoral Commission does, as it did in some parts of Uganda, refuses to register people in a particular area because they are known to belong to the opposition. Okay? You couldn't go to court and say, if those guys had registered and voted, they would have voted for me. Yeah? You couldn't prove that mathematically. Although the cumulative impact of all these illegalities is to deny the opposition the victory. But there is no means of demonstrating that, in fact, those illegalities have affected the result. Okay? How do we summarize the relevant law? The relevant law was stated in 3 propositions in the leading case of Morgan versus Simpson. This is what Lord Denning summarized the principles as. Principle number 1, if an election is conducted so badly that it has not substantially complied with the law, the election is invalid, irrespective of whether the result was affected or not. If an election was conducted so badly that it is not substantially in compliance with the law as relates to the election is vitiated, irrespective whether the result was affected or not. So you delink the result from the substantiality of the illegalities. Number 2, if an election is conducted substantially according to the law, it is not invalidated by a breach of the rules or a mistake in the polls, provided that it does not affect the result. Provided that it does not affect the result. Number 3, an election that is conducted substantially according to the law, but in which there is a breach of the rules or a mistake that affects the result, then the election is vitiated. Okay? John, is this the sort of thing you're warning me about?
Yes.
Okay, so let me then try and see if I can break down this. If an election is conducted so badly that it is not in compliance with the law in substantial respects, that election is invalid. If an election is conducted according to the law, yeah, it will not be invalidated by the fact that there are rules which have been breached or errors which have been made, so long as the result has not been affected. Yeah? So that states in the negative what I'm going to state now in the positive. An election that is conducted substantially according to the law, but in which there is a breach of the rules in a manner that can be demonstrated to have affected the result, that election is invalid. Okay? Now, what happened in 2013 is we took ground 1 and ground 3 and made them one ground. So I apologize from the beginning about the technicality of the technical nature of this argument, because it is important because when I talk to people about it, like when I want to talk to people in Uganda about this, I'm like, what does that exactly mean? Then only when you drill down and get to questions like intimidation or supposing I stuffed ballots, supposing I did some ballot stuffing, but instead of stuffing the ballots for my candidate, I stuff for the loser. Okay? It's an illegality, and probably it affected the result. But because you cannot demonstrate that those ballots would have been yours, you cannot prove impact. Yeah? So this is exactly the sort of thing that I was warned about. But now, what's the way out of this conundrum? The way out of this conundrum, there are 2 possibilities. There are 3 possibilities. One of them is, of course, asking the Supreme Court to depart from its precedent in 2013. Now, this is irrespective of who the petitioner is. This is bad law anyway, because I think this debate gets caught up in partisan arguments. This is bad law, yeah. So to persuade the Supreme Court to depart from the key findings of principle that it made in 2013. Number 2, to redraft Section 83 of the Elections Act, because that's where this question of illegality is. That section is very badly worded. It is worded exactly the same as Section 56, I believe, of the Ugandan Elections Act. They are substantially the same. And if you redraft that section, what you need to do is 2 things. First, to clarify that substantial illegality invalidates an election. And then number 2, to clarify the effects of irregularities and errors that affect the result, and say that these 2 are different grounds as opposed to one ground. If that doesn't happen, you could also, there's another way you could do this, which is to enact laws that redefine the decision. I don't usually recommend this, but as a matter of constitutional law, there is no reason why an act of parliament cannot override a decision of the court. It's been done in all manner of places. It is not advice I want to give members of parliament, because when they think they can do that, they probably will. Thank you.